Hello, this is one of 200 talks on the history of Western art. The talks are divided into sections like the chapters of a book, and this is section 13 on Baroque art, and in particular episode 3 on Peter Paul Rubens, who you can see here. Now, Rubens is one of the most celebrated artists of the Baroque era. He was born in 1577 in Siegen, Westphalia, which is now in Germany, to Jan Rubens and Maria Pepperlinks. His father was a lawyer, a Calvinist lawyer, who fled from Antwerp because of religious persecution, and he lived in exile. He was eventually imprisoned and died in 1587, that is when Rubens was 10, and he moved with his mother back to Antwerp and was raised as a Catholic. He received a classical education. He began his artistic training when he was 14 under Tobias Verhaecht, and then Adam van Noort, and finally Otto van Veen. And all of this training installed in him a sense of painting as a humanistic profession. When he was 21, he was admitted into the Painters Guild in Antwerp. A couple of years later, in 1600, he travelled to Italy. Travelled extensively. He saw works of all the major artists, Titian, Tintoretto and Raphael. He entered the service of Vincenzo Gonzaga, Duke of Mantua, and travelled around Italy, including Venice and Rome. He heard his mother was ill in 1608 and returned to Antwerp, and then decided to establish his own studio there. And at the age of 32, he married the 18-year-old Isabella Brandt. She came from a wealthy and distinguished family, and that gave him a sort of instant social standing. This is the happy couple. This painting actually broke new ground in portrait painting, but he did use traditional symbolism. You can see behind them honeysuckle. That was a well-known symbol for faithfulness, and the hands laid over one another have symbolised matrimony since ancient times. However, these traditional references are just part of a very, what would have been seen at the time, a very novel portrait, a snapshot-like scene showing middle-class contentedness, substantial affluence. Just look at her clothes, strong affectation, strong affection are expressed in all the features of the portrait, and it's particularly significant as it serves as a sort of personal memento of the marriage, but also it's a statement of Rubens' social status and artistic identity. It shows, I think, with their wealthy clothing and the style of the portrait, their place in the upper echelons of society. Incidentally, it's one of the earliest known self-portraits by Rubens and one of the few double portraits of that period. It's also unusual in showing such an intimate and personal portrait of the couple. Now, when he returned to Antwerp in 1608, he was commissioned to produce two large religious works. This is one of them, The Descent from the Cross, for Antwerp Cathedral, and he worked on these between 1610 and 1614. Producing a masterpiece of Baroque art, showing his ability to capture dramatic movement and deep emotional intensity. This is a photograph I took when I was there, but let me show you a closer picture. It's the moment when Christ's body is being lowered from the cross. The composition uses chiaroscuro. It's a very dynamic picture. You can see the diagonal composition, which creates this sense of drama. And it's his contribution to the Catholic Counter-Reformation that was going on at the time. The intention was to evoke strong emotions and reinforce Catholic doctrine. By this stage, he'd set up a large studio, which became renowned for its efficiency and productivity. And so a lot of his work, this one, for example, were produced with the help of assistants. But Rubens himself would always produce the key central figures and sometimes the key elements of the painting. It is the central, well, as we just saw, it's the central panel of a triptych, and it was commissioned by one of the local guilds to, as I said, hang in Antwerp Cathedral, which it's where it's still situated, or where the two of them are still situated. This is the other painting, The Raising of the Cross, a companion piece. It's, as you can see, as in the last one, the lighting is typically Baroque, dramatic lighting, strong light and shadow, chiaroscuro, intense emotional expressions, and it was intended to evoke these strong feelings, as I said. It's a bit unusual in that Rubens' Christ is a very muscular, physically imposing figure, reflecting perhaps the influence of Michelangelo. And this emphasis on physicality, I think, symbolises the weight of humanity's sins that Christ bears. The soldier to the left of Christ is wearing armour from Rubens' era, and some have suggested it's a self-portrait, perhaps acknowledging his own complicity in Christ's crucifixion. It's rich in symbolism. The cliff face with the trees and vines is a reminder of the Garden of Eden, and it's therefore juxtaposing the tree of knowledge with the cross as a tree of life. And on the right, we can see at the top the convergence of the sun and the moon, foreshadowing the eclipse during the crucifixion. And again, we have a strong diagonal composition, forming a sort of visual link between heaven and earth. This painting marks a departure from his earlier work. It depicts a hunting scene called Wolf and Fox Hunt, and it's the beginning of a number of hunting scenes he painted, which were designed, they're all large paintings for wealthy clients, designed as replacements for tapestries. And it reflects his growing interest in extremely dynamic and energetic scenes, some of them inspired by classical mythology. What we see here is a chaotic, vibrant scene of hunters and their dogs chasing wolves and foxes. That itself is a bit surprising because wolves and foxes were never hunted together. So scholars have suggested it had some sort of deep political or social comment or meaning that is now lost. It's typical of his style. Note the precise detail, but also the sort of lush brushwork and the focus again on movement and colour. It was probably commissioned by a wealthy patron. We don't know who commissioned it. Hunting scenes were popular amongst the nobility, and it was painted again with the help of assistants, although we know, because he proudly claimed, that the wolves were painted entirely by his own hand. It's a large painting, and one client remarked, "None but great princes have houses fit to hang it up in." Despite that, we know that in 1617 it was trimmed at the top and left to fit into the client's home, commonly done to tapestries and to paintings to fit in the houses precisely where they wanted them to be placed. This is a portrait of his wife, Isabella Brandt, painted in the early 1620s. It shows his ability to capture the essence of his subject. She gazes directly out of us. She's got a sort of, I don't know, cheeky, maybe even saucy expression, reflecting, I think, Rubens' deep affection for her. She has a rich black gown with intricate lace, a fashionable ruff collar, which was the fashion amongst Flemish aristocracy in the early 17th century. It's complemented by delicate jewellery, a gold chain and pearl earrings, both signifying wealth and refined taste. Now, at this time, during this period, the 1610s and 1620s, Rubens was at the height of his career. He was renowned throughout Europe, not only as an artist, but also as a diplomat and scholar. So this is a very prestigious commission. In 1621, Queen Marie de Medici of France commissioned this large cycle of paintings, now known as Marie de Medici cycle, and they celebrate her life and the life of her late husband, Henry IV. Each is a large allegorical painting depicting a different aspect of her life, and the painting cycle was interrupted by her exile from France in 1630, but he completed the work and it was installed in Luxembourg Palace in Paris, and it's now in the Louvre. Let me show you a close-up of one of the works. This is the disembarkation at Marseille on the 3rd of November 1600, and it celebrates the arrival of the young Italian princess on November the 3rd, 1600, and it marked her beginning of her journey as the wife of King Henry IV, and she became Queen Consort of France. So Rubens is blending reality, her arrival, with mythology to elevate the historical event to a sort of epic spectacle. She's disembarking from a richly adorned ship. She's stepping onto French soil with grace and dignity. She's dressed in resplendent attire befitting her royal status, and she has a calm expression, contrasting with the dynamic activity around her. Notice in the foreground there's the mythological figure Neptune, the god of the sea, with his triton, and companions emerging from the water, symbolising the sea's submission and guaranteed safe passage for the queen. The Nereides, the sea nymphs, seem to be guiding the ship and representing the blessings of the ocean deities. I must say, their voluptuousness almost overwhelms the sea above, but nevertheless the princess, above the princess's head, is the personification of fame, soaring in the sky, blowing trumpets to announce her arrival. It's a grand, elaborate programme cycle and reflects his skill in narrative painting and understanding of classical themes. In 1628 to 29, he stayed in Madrid, where he painted this work, The Fall of Man. It's partly I'm showing you it because it's a copy of this work by Titian, The Fall of Man. And it's Rubens obviously admired Titian. Titian painted his work when he was in his 60s. He was one of the foremost painters at the time of the Italian Renaissance. And the painting was probably commissioned by King Philip II of Spain. Titian's version on the left, painted around 1550, shows the Renaissance ideals of balance, harmony and restrained emotion. The figures have got classical proportions and they're in a serene landscape. The composition is symmetrical. Adam is gentle and contemplative, and it represents the Renaissance focus on ideal beauty and philosophical depth. In contrast, Rubens, although remember it is a copy of Titian's painting, shows elements of the Baroque era, and so you can see a greater subtle changes, but a greater emphasis on movement, emotion, and increased dramatic intensity. Look, for example, at Adam. In Rubens' painting, he's leaning forward, almost pushing her away. He's caught, therefore, and is showing a moment of dramatic tension rather than calm and harmony. Their expressions conveying a sort of inner turmoil concerning the decision they're taking. Now, the painting by, or Rubens' work with Jan van Bruegel, and it was Titian painted the figures and Bruegel painted the animals and the rich foliage. And you can see in this Eden there's an abundance of animals, including a parrot in the tree. So, whereas Titian's work exudes this calm, reflective mood, Rubens has added urgency and emotional depth. And the reason I'm showing them together is to highlight the difference between the High Renaissance and the Baroque period. Now, I mentioned Rubens was an important diplomat as well as an artist, and here he's combined the two skills. This is a complex theme. It's called Minerva Protects Pax from Mars, Peace and War. It's a significant work from his later career. It was painted in 1629 during a diplomatic mission to England, and it was a gift, painted as a gift to King Charles I, and it reflects his diplomatic mission, which concerned peace. He was acting as an envoy for Philip IV of Spain. Now, Britain and Spain had been at war for the previous 5 years. Both sides wanted peace, and Rubens used this as a sort of a tool in his peace negotiations to illustrate the benefits of peace. So there's a central figure of Pax or peace, together with Ceres, the goddess of earth, and she's sharing her bounty with the children, as you can see, and the children represent future generations. But they're also the portraits of the family he was staying with, not the king, but Sir Balthazar Gerbier. And behind Pax is Minerva, the goddess of wisdom, and you can see she's pushing away Mars, the god of war. So she's protecting them from Mars, pushing him away to show that peace will bring prosperity and plenty. Rubens was successful. In 1630, a peace treaty was signed between Britain and Spain. Now, in 1626, Isabella Brandt died, and Rubens was travelling extensively at this time because of his diplomatic missions, and he was knighted by both Philip IV of Spain and by Charles I of England for his diplomatic and artistic achievements. And then in 1630, he married his second wife, Helena Fourment, And like his first wife, she was also from a wealthy family of silk and tapestry merchants, and many of her siblings married into important families. In fact, one of her brothers married the sister of Rubens' first wife, Isabella Brandt. This is called Helena Fourment in a Fur Cloak, and it was produced in the early 1630s. And it shows his ability to capture the beauty and elegance of his subject. I'll show you another portrait of Helena in a moment. This is Het Pelskin portrait of Helena Fourment. The Het Pelskin means the pelt or the fur. It's sometimes also called the little fur coat, and it was painted as his second wife was getting out of the bath. It's a life-size portrait painted when she was 18, and she's shown standing, her voluptuous body partly concealed by the fur-trimmed cloak that gave the painting its name. She's looking directly out at us, exuding confidence with no embarrassment. So it highlights her physical beauty, her breasts pressed together by her right arm, her left hand holding the pelisse over her belly. It was a deeply personal work. Rubens left it specifically to Helena in his will. It's a very intimate portrait, and it was likely not intended for public display. In fact, after he died, Helena didn't know how to handle the artwork. She was planning to bequeath it to her second husband, but changed her mind and left it to her children from her marriage to Rubens. It shows Rubens' tendency to paint his wife's portrait in various works, public and private. For example, in a public work, The Judgment of Paris, he uses Helena's features as for the face of the figure of Venus. This portrait of her is now in the Kunsthistorische Museum in Vienna. A final portrait, this is Rubens, Helena Fourment and their son Franz, painted later in life. And it shows the age difference between them. When they married in December 1630, he was 53 and she was only 16. But despite this age gap, their union proved fruitful and they had 5 children together. And in this portrait, he's showing a sort of idealised version of the family in a garden of their Antwerp mansion. She's depicted as a young, beautiful woman, and he's accentuated her youth by her plump, pearlescent hand, contrasting with Rubens' ruddy and weathered hand. The child, Franz, was born in 1633, and he's probably about 3 years old at the time this was painted, which would place it in 1636 when it was painted. It cleverly links father and son through various visual elements. He's wearing a leather strap across his chest. That signifies his noble right to carry a sword. And to echo this, his son Franz has got this playful ribbon tied across his chest, positioning him as his father's heir. So it's both a family portrait and a testament to Rubens' skill in capturing intimate moments and his ability to idealise his subjects. It's now in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. It has its ownership has a very complex history. It was seized by the Nazis from Baron Eduard de Rothschild during World War II, but it was later reinstated to him in 1946. This is the village fete, Flemish Kermis. It's a painting from Rubens' late period, produced around 1635 to 38. And it shows his interest in Netherlandish traditions. He's depicting a lively and vibrant scene of villagers dancing during a festival. And there's various activities going on here. Warm colours, dynamic movement, drawing upon earlier influences, Peter Bruegel the Elder. And this painting is a prime example of that. They are dancing. You can see their bodies interwoven. They're moving in circles, intertwined arms, flowing garments, rhythm throughout the painting, drawing us into the heart of the festivities. Incidentally, you might wonder, this word kermis, it originates from a Flemish word, kerkmesse, which means church mass. And so these festivals were annual events celebrating the patron saint of the village. So it's combining religious ceremonies with secular festivities. A very different painting, The Garden of Love, again another one of his later works, produced during his second marriage. It's an idyllic scene. There's courting couples in a lush garden, reflecting, I think, his personal happiness and his fascination with classical themes. There's vibrant colours, sensuous figures, typical of his Baroque style. There's a beautiful garden with many symbols of love and fertility, flowers, fountains, statues. And central to the composition, there are three women in lavish attire, perhaps, we're not sure, representing different aspects of love or perhaps stages of courtship. They each have male suitors, and their interactions suggest budding romances and the pleasure of companionship. This is the painting I mentioned, The Judgment of Paris, a major mythological work by Rubens, produced again in the 1630s. It tells the story of Paris, and this is from Greek mythology. Paris is asked to judge which of the goddesses, Athena or Minerva, Aphrodite or Venus, and Hera or Juno, which of those three is the most beautiful. Paris chose Aphrodite or Venus. Remember, the one whose face was where he used Helena Fourment, his wife, as the model. And Aphrodite, in return for being selected, gave him the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen of Troy. And of course, that provoked the Trojan Wars and everything that followed that. In this scene, there's a lush landscape based on Flemish landscape. Three goddesses standing before Paris, each representing a different virtue. And Rubens has Rubens' interest in classical mythology reoccurs in many of his work. This is a prime example of his interpretation of the story at the point where Paris has just made his decision and is handing the golden apple across to Aphrodite. Now I end with three landscapes produced near the end of his very productive life. His later years were marked by continued artistic productivity, and in 1635 he acquired a country estate, Het Steen, which you can see here. His landscape is characterised by the use of warm colours. It's a sort of Arcadian landscape, a classical ideal. His approach, or his work in his later years, was more personal, more introspective, less of the dynamic movement we saw earlier. Here we see in the foreground there is activity. There's a stagecoach. He's a chateau or house in the background, and in the foreground is the hunter and the prey. We can see the other side of the fallen tree. This is the Rainbow Landscape, 1636, now in London in the Wallace collection. It's a masterful depiction of the Flemish landscape. It showcases his profound appreciation for nature and rural life. It captures the harmonious relationship between humans and the natural landscape. And in the foreground, we see farmers, peasants, returning from a day's work in the field, engaging in everyday activities. Some are carrying tools and bundles from the harvest. Others guide livestock along the winding path. They're rendered with Rubens' characteristic attention to detail. They convey a sense of movement mixed with contentment. There's a quietness to the painting. And the central focus is the vibrant rainbow arching across the sky, symbolising hope and the beauty of nature, connecting the earth to the heavens, perhaps suggesting a divine blessing over the land and the people. And then the final work that I'm showing you today is Farmers Returning from the Field, a very late work produced in 1640, the year he died. It reflects his continued interest in landscape, his ability to capture the beauty of everyday life. At the end of the day, we see farmers returning home after a long day's work, and warm colours, classical ideals, livestock, cows and sheep, reflecting his personal contentment, I think, during his later years and his appreciation of nature. And he died on the 30th of May, 1640, in Antwerp, leaving a legacy as one of the greatest exponents of Baroque painting. So that brings me to the end of this brief tour of Rubens' life and work, one of the greatest of the Baroque painters. It just leaves me to thank you again for your time and attention, and I look forward to our next journey through Western art together. Thank you. Goodbye for now.